Hey guys, so Master Duel is of course very popular among the player base right now, and so I thought I'd take a look at the most common hand traps and staples played and their ratios among Platinum Tier 1 decks. So if you check out this Road of the King article, which I'll link below, I believe they typically post top OCG deck lists. Anyways, they basically have been compiling all the different deck lists that have reached Platinum Tier 1 on Master Duel. Now you see 60 different decks listed here, but at the time that I actually collected data, they only had 40, so that's what this video is going to be based on. Now this is a little different than my typical hand trap and staple analysis because this video is not based on topping list where you could have multiple lists of the same deck, but rather it's going to be all unique decks, so you get to really see which hand traps and staples are sort of universal across different decks. Anyways, if you break down the playstyle of the 40 decks included in this video, and I'll list all of the decks included in the video in the description, you see that half of them were combo decks like Adamancipator, Endymion, and Drytron. Then you have 12.5% of mid-range decks like Dogmatika Invoked or Tri-Brigade Zoo, 22.5% of control decks like Eldlich or Sky Striker, and 15% of beatdown decks like Cyber Dragons and Dinosaur. Now if you look at the amount of hand traps played in these deck lists, it ranged from 0 to 14 cards with a median of 8 hand traps. If you were to look at this number as a proportion relative to the deck size, then it converts to about 0 to 35% with a median of basically 1/5 of your deck being hand traps. Now if you break it down by the different deck styles, surprisingly combo decks had a median of 8 hand traps, whereas beatdown decks had the lowest at 5.5, even though these are going second strategies. Mid-range decks had the highest median of hand traps in this analysis. If we do the same but with board break cards, and this category to me includes destruction cards like Raigeki or monster negation cards like Droplets, or even backrow removal cards like Cosmic Cyclone, and so these cards range from 0 to 11 with a median of 3 cards. Master Duel is a best of 1 format after all, so it does influence deck building a bit, where even going first strategies likely have to play some going second cards in case they lose the coin toss. If you separate it by deck playstyle again, not surprisingly combo decks play the least amount of these board break cards with the median of just 1 card, compared to going second break my board kind of strategies that unsurprisingly played a median of 7 board breakers. Now let's cover the top 5 most played hand traps among these lists and their most common ratios. So at number 1 is surprisingly not Maxx but Ash, being seen in 33 of the 40 lists. The most common ratio was at 3, basically in every list. At second is indeed the infamous Maxx, which again was mostly played at 3 among these platinum lists. And then we have Impermanence, and so now the count really drops off because even this was seen in 14 of the 40 lists, with most common ratio actually being 2, and oddly enough several decks just played the card at 1. At number 4 is Nibiru, where it was seen in just 9 lists and was most commonly played at 1. I think Nibiru is not so great, at least not right now in Master Duel, because recently Eldlich has become so popular. At number 5 is Gamma, the only super rare of the bunch, and it is semi-limited on the ban list in Master Duel, and of course all played at 2, because playing this at 1 when you have to play with Brick and Driver would just be silly. Next we can cover the top 3 back row hate cards, and the first was Harpy's Feather Duster, which is limited, so they were all played at 1 if it was played, which was seen in 17 lists. And then we have Lightning Storm, which is also quite popular because it is pretty flexible in being able to hit both back row and monsters, which makes it a great card for a best of 1 format. The most common ratio was in fact 1, oddly enough, and the next common ratio being at 2. And then at number 3 is Twin Twisters, seen in just 8 of the 40 lists, and again, most common ratio was just 1. So I guess with backrow removal, a lot of players are not running too many since it's a best of 1 maybe, I'm not so sure. Now if we look at the other board break cards excluding backrow removal, then the most common one was Forbidden Droplet at 8 lists. Since it is a quick play card, it has utility even if you're going first, and going second this card can be pretty deadly. Looks like the most common ratio for this card was at 3, and being an ultra rare, it's gonna cost you to get a playset. And then the next common board break card was Raigeki, which is limited at 1 in the Master Duel list so far, although for the actual TCG, this did recently come back to 3. Now while it is an ultra rare, you can actually get this card through solo mode I believe, I think that's where I got mine. And then a big drop off in numbers, but Gamma Seal was played in 3 lists, and generally played at just 1 to plop over your opponent's problematic monster. Obviously just going to be played in dedicated going second strategies for the most part, and there's not too many of those in Master Duel format. As for the most common draw cards, Pot of Desires was the most common among all of the different lists, being seen in 14 of the 40. Now this card recently got put to 1 on the TCG ban list, which was definitely really out of the blue, but I suppose Desires may be the most common one among the pot cards. It was mostly played at 3 if it was used at all. The second common draw card was Pot of Prosperity, which was mostly played at 2, and then tied for third is actually Pot of Extravagance and Allure of Darkness at 4 of the 40 lists. These two cards are played in more specific decks and are not as universal as Desires or Prosperity. The great thing about draw cards in Master Duel is that surprisingly most of them are just in the super rare slot. Now as for the top 3 common other spells that I have not covered, the first is Call by the Grave, being seen in over half of the lists included. This card is at 2 in the Master Duel list, and in fact that was by far the most common ratio. Crossout Designator is quite popular as well, being seen in 13 of the 40 list, probably primarily because of the existence of Maxx in the format. Interestingly though, it was mostly just played at 1 if used, so that does not seem too reliable. And then at number 3 was Monster Reborn, which of course is limited, so you can only play it at 1. I believe this is another card you can obtain through solo mode, so being an ultra rare is not too much of a deterrent. And finally, let's cover some of the most common traps. Number 1 was Imperial Order, being seen in 7 of the 40 lists. Thank goodness this card just got banned in the TCG. I really don't want to see this card. It is still limited in Master Duel though, so just play it at 1. Speaking of another limited trap card, this is Vanity's Emptiness. For this one, only specific decks can play it, unlike Order, and locks out of special summoning, and I'm just glad that this card is at least banned in the TCG. Now tied for 3rd is Solemn Judgment and Paleozoic Dynamiscus. Solemn has always been strong and the most common ratio is at 3, just really powerful in terms of being able to negate pretty much anything. And same thing for Dynamiscus as well. Dynamiscus, it's only a rare too, so it's a very cheap option to obtain and great for control decks out there, which provides that banishing. Alright guys, so that was it for the data review of the most common hand traps and staples among deck lists that reach Platinum Tier 1 in Master Duel. Hope you found that helpful in shifting things around for your deck list. Take care guys.